Welcome back. You're watching Business at 9. And like we were putting into perspective how the Ministry of External Affairs today reaffirmed the strength of the India-United States strategic partnership, stating that the relationship is rooted in shared interests, democratic values, and robust people-to-people ties. But as far as reading into this and the timing of the same as well, let me take the opportunity to take that across to my guest joining me this evening, Dr. Mukesh Aghi, President and CEO, USISPF. Mr. Aghi, thank you very much for taking the time out and joining us here this evening on Business at 9 on ET Now. Always great to have your insights. But let's begin with the fact that how do you really interpret the MEA's assertion today and that India-US ties have weathered several transitions and challenges? This is not the first time, in fact. But is this, in a sense, a confident reaffirmation of strategic depth or a defensive posture amid tariff and energy tensions? Because does the MEA's framing today hint at quiet back-channel progress that the public narrative doesn't yet reflect? Or are we simply seeing a diplomatic holding pattern until the political and economic context shifts?
Well, you have to understand the relationship between India and the United States is not only very broad, but very deep. And the relationship is not just between the White House and the government of India itself. The relationship also goes with the business community, with people to people, with technology partnership, defense partnership. So we have multiple layers of this relationship. And if one part is stressed out, that does not mean that the relationship has taken a nosedive. The other factor is any time, any relationship, you will have some stress factor. But if we have the depth and maturity, which both countries have, we will manage this. So I don't think we should be too alarmed about some of the statements coming out of Washington, D.C. And also, we shouldn't be too alarmed about the tariffs. I think they will adjust with time. So I'm very confident that the relationship will move in a positive trajectory.
Right, Mr. Aghi. In fact, as you pointed out, and taking a cue from what you've referred to, but how the relationship is clearly bigger than one aspect and also has, of course, many layers, including diaspora, people-to-people connections. But given the fact that how it's panned out in recent times, including the jabs taken at India, like the statement of Trump of the dead economy, all in all, how do you view that from your vantage point?
Well, I think the statement on India being called a dead economy was unwarranted. India is one of the fastest growing economy in the world itself, and it has crossed over 4 trillion and will be pretty soon in the next couple of years a $5 trillion economy. So I think sometimes you have to learn to ignore because you have a president who has a habit of making certain statements. So I think we need to basically look at what's substantive and what's not substantive and then just move on.
Right, that's one way to look at it. But the other aspect of circling back is to the statement made by the MEA. The emphasis on the substantive agenda suggests a prioritization of long-term strategic convergence over resolving immediate trade frictions. And is that, in fact, a sustainable approach given the current climate? In your view, can India and the US meaningfully advance strategic cohesion if trade friction, especially escalating tariffs linked to Russia, as what we're looking at, is allowed to simmer in the background?
You will always have some simmering when you have such a broad relationship between the two countries. But you have to understand that a US cannot ignore India as a trading partner. It's almost a $200 billion trade between the two countries. A large economy where US companies are leveraging through their global capability centers and other aspect of India's talent itself. At the same time, you have over almost 300,000 Indian students here contributing roughly $25 billion into domestic economy. So I don't think you can ignore those factors and say, okay, you can just wave off India from that perspective. I think US community, both business and people to people and administration itself sees India as a serious partner, especially from not only just from an economic perspective, but also from a geopolitical perspective.
In fact, Mr. Aghi, the other aspect that was spoken about was how this is also being looked at in terms of the relationship. And having said that, can defense diplomacy truly act as a ballast for the economic friction, or are we overestimating its spillover? Because when you're looking at the fact that with the Yuddh Abhyas set to take place in Alaska later this month and a US defense policy team visiting Delhi in mid-August is what we're given to understand, can defense diplomacy realistically act as a stabilizing ballast for a relationship that's under strain from economic and political headwinds? In your purview, how can the US-India defense partnership, described as an important pillar that we see, be leveraged to create goodwill that spills over into resolving contentious trade and energy issues?
No, absolutely. I think what we are seeing is more of a political posture which has crept into tariff, but I don't think it has crept into the business community or has crept into the defense part also. When you look at the defense partnership continues, both countries have more joint exercises than any other country in the world itself. So in every aspect, the relationship continues. The noise is more on the political side, and I think we need to understand that noise will continue because you have a president who like to make certain, I call the statements, basically operate in a very chaotic manner. But that should not impact our long-term partnership between the two countries.
In fact, talking about the statements he makes as far as Donald Trump is concerned, let's talk about the aspect of how agriculture and dairy, of course, remain non-starters for the India deal, clearly red lines. But yet Trump's rhetoric continues to pressure India to open up. And recently we saw Prime Minister Modi that signaled readiness to pay a heavy price for farmers. But in a high-stakes environment, Mr. Aghi, how can India craft a second phase trade ask that avoids sacrificing the red lines?
No, I think every nation has red line, and you can't basically, because of a trade, sacrifice those. So you look at European, they did not open the dairy to the agreement they've signed with the U.S. on tariff. You look at other nations, they have the red line. So I think India has a red line on dairy. It has a red line on wheat, rice, and maize itself. So India has to uphold those red lines. And I think what we have to do is a better job of explaining to the team here, especially to the president, that India can't cross those red lines. And I think we have seen in certain cases there has been a waiver from the president and respecting those red lines. So I don't think that's a deal breaker. It's just a matter of having a much more deeper conversation and explaining the position to the president directly.
Right, Mr. Aghi, and talking about how, you have also viewed this in the past and set the real risk to losing the chance to attract US firms moving supply chains away from China. So how much time do you think India realistically has before other players, in fact, take that space?
This is always a challenge because you have China, which is trying to hold on to the US manufacturing. You have other nations who are trying to attract. You have to understand that the tariff which US has put on India, 50%, will have some kind of a dent, but it does not stop US companies moving their manufacturing to India because one is you have a domestic market they have to address, but at the same time, on the average, US companies, 40% of his business is outside the US. So these companies can always manufacture in India for the international market and does not have to come back to the US itself. So I don't think we should start thinking that with this tariff, US company will stop coming into India. I think they will keep on leveraging for domestic market and for the international business also.
Right, Mr. Aghi, but let's also talk about how, with the US openly threatening BRICS members over participation, how should India's BRICS incoming, 2026 chair defend its strategic autonomy, according to you?
Sometimes you don't have to respond to every statement coming out of the White House. You have to understand that this is not just India or BRICS. Almost every nation has to deal with the current administration, especially with the president who likes to make statements which may be unwarranted. So I would say that let's not react to everything which comes out of the White House in a manner that we have to respond to it. And I think that's where we have to have a little bit of I call a thick skin and not react to some of the statements coming out.
Mr. Aghi, I also want to draw your attention to how Trump has dealt with, allies like Japan and South Korea. And this environment, is a legally binding trade deal with him even worth pursuing, or should India focus on sectoral wins instead?
Well, you have to understand that there are a lot of moving parts here. One is there are lawsuits in the U.S. saying that the tariff being put on by President Trump are illegal. And I think that's going to go down to Supreme Court, and that's going to decide. But at the same time, what really happens is you have a more of a sentiment which sends a message to partners who are being treated in a manner that they're not equal. And what we have to do is basically is hold on to our principles and hold on to our strategy, and making sure that we are not impacted from a geopolitical perspective, we're not impacted from a trade perspective. And so I would say that India needs to take a posture which is good for India and execute from their perspective.
All right, Mr. Aghi, as you pointed out, the other aspect is how hypocrisy we're looking at as far as cornering India over Russian oil is concerned. We've seen how that has been a talking point, but we're also looking at the timing of, different kind of meetings on the agenda, whether it's Trump, Putin, then we also have the External Affairs Minister visit to Russia. All in all, how are you looking at all of this that is developing, moreover in the global playbook as well?
Well, the way I read it is that India is trying to basically reach out to its friends and allies to strengthen the relationship. You have to understand that tariff is not the end of the world, and it does have an impact on India's GDP, roughly less than 1% itself. But overall, this is not going to basically slow down the growth of India's economy, the growth of India's aspiration itself. But more important, you have to understand that is the message which is being sent to the US is, if you want to go in the direction India has other friends, and India can leverage from that perspective. So I think the messaging is coming out loud and clear that India will maintain its strategic autonomy. And if US is not going to be a equal partner, then India will reach out to Russia, to China, to EU and other countries itself.
Right, Mr. Aghi. Thank you very much on that note, in fact, for joining us here on ET Now, sharing with us your perspective as to how you're essentially looking at this. But of course, it will call for another conversation when we finally know how this is going to pan out for both the countries. But for the moment, we leave it at that. Let's also continue to put focus on more developments that we're tracking here on Business at 9. Let's tell you how